This is Thunder Cave, Chapter 27, Part 2, on page 244, starting towards the top here. "He won't be taking off now," he said. Glisho headed straight for Donovan's airplane, which was just beginning to roll forward. For a second, I thought Donovan was going to ram him, but he slammed on the brakes just before we collided. "Get out!" Glisho shouted. I pulled the door open and jumped out. Glisho was right behind me, carrying a shotgun and a flashlight. He pumped a shell into the chamber, switched on the light, and pointed both of them at Donovan's airplane. Nothing happened for several seconds. I heard the pop, pop, pop of gunfire coming from the camp. The light was fading quickly. I saw sweat running down Glisho's face and realized that I was sweating worse than he was. Finally, the door of Donovan's airplane swung slowly open. Glisho moved quickly to the side, pointing the shotgun at the door. "I'm unarmed," Donovan yelled. "Come out slowly," Glisho said. Donovan climbed awkwardly out of the airplane with his hands on his head. "Turn around," Glisho yelled. "Put your hands on the wing." Donovan complied. Glisho gave me the shotgun and the flashlight, then walked up behind him. He roughly grabbed one of Donovan's hands and snapped on the handcuff, then repeated the process with the other hand and stepped back. I looked at Donovan in the beam of the light. His khakis were soiled and torn. His hair was tousled, and there was an ugly bruise on his left cheek. Just the day before, he had everything going his way. But look at him now, I thought. Look at him now. "Congratulations, Jacob," Donovan said calmly. I didn't say anything. "I don't know how you found me," he continued, "but you did. This ought to make your father very proud." "He'll be pleased," I said. "I suppose so," he smiled. "So tell me, how did you find me? Kenya is a big place." I shined the light on the landing gear. He followed the beam and saw the elephant transmitter. He started to laugh. "Very clever," he said. "Very clever." "Let's go," Glisho said, pushing Donovan towards the camp. It was too late to fly out, so we spent the night in the camp. They captured 14 poachers. 2 of them were killed during the raid. Early the next morning, the prisoners, including Donovan, were loaded into the trucks to begin the long drive to Nairobi. Glisho told me that they had enough evidence to keep Donovan in prison for a long time. "And I can tell you," he said, "Kenyan prisons are extremely unpleasant." There were hundreds of tusks and animal skins stacked in neat piles throughout the camp. What I'd seen before in the other poachers' camp was only a fraction of what they'd taken. No matter how long Donovan spent in jail, it wouldn't bring back any of the animals that he'd killed. The damage could not be undone. "The soldiers will stand guard until we transport the contraband," Glisho said. "We are finished here. Your father's expecting you." We had gotten word the night before that my father had been flown to a hospital in Nairobi, and he was doing just fine. "All right," I said. "Let's go." We arrived at the airport about 3 hours later. A police car met us and dropped me at the hospital. As I walked down the hall, the smell and activity brought back memories of my mom. It had all started in a hospital like this, thousands of miles away. I missed her and wished I could have her back. I felt the heaviness come into my chest again. I took a deep breath and told myself that now wasn't the time to think about this. There'd be plenty of time later. Right now, I had to think about my father. When I got to the room, Sapit was sitting next to my father's bed, and they were talking quietly. They stopped when I walked in. Aside from looking tired, my father seemed to be doing well. I was relieved. "We got him," I said. Sapit laughed, and my father let out a whoop of joy. "Nice going, son, nice going," he said. I told them what happened. When I finished, Sapit stood up and put his hand on my shoulder. "I'm afraid I must be going," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Back to Masai land," he said. "They are waiting for me." My father put his hand out. "Thanks for everything, Sapit," he said, and they shook hands warmly. "Perhaps we'll see each other again someday." Perhaps, I thought. What was he talking about? I looked at my father, but he gave me no indication of what was going on. "Walk with me, Jacob," Sepet said. I followed him out of the room. As we walked down the hallway, he didn't say anything. When we got outside the hospital, he pointed and said, "My ride." An old truck was parked in front. Standing in the back of it were a half-dozen Maasai dressed in traditional clothes. "What's going on, Sepet?" "I must go back," he said. "I will live in Satanic's corral." "I understand that, but—" "Your father will explain," he said, and slipped the snake amulet over his head. "This is yours." "No," I protested. "I want you to keep it." "It does not belong to me," he said, and put the amulet over my head. "Wear it always. It's very important." "But I don't understand," I said. "Why won't I see you again?" "You have accomplished your goal in Kenya," he said. "The goal was greater than you thought. It is time for you to move on to another goal." He spit on his hand and held it out. I didn't put my head down. I wasn't ready to say goodbye. Sepet smiled and said, "It's customary." I bowed, and he gently placed his hand on my head. When I looked up, he was still smiling. "Goodbye, my good friend," he said. Tears welled in my eyes. "Goodbye, Sepet." He climbed into the back of the truck with the others. I watched in disbelief as he pulled away from the curb and merged into the busy traffic. Sepet and the others waved. I held my hand up in the air until the truck disappeared around a corner, then put it down. I stood on the curb for a long time. I couldn't imagine not seeing Sepet again. Finally, I walked slowly back into the hospital. When I got into my father's room, I sat in the chair next to his bed and put my head in my hands. "I don't understand why we won't see him again," I said. "Because we're going back to New York." I looked up at him. New York? I felt my heart thumping in my chest. We hadn't had time to discuss what he was going to do with me. "My leg needs some attention," he continued. "And I talked with your uncle in Nebraska. He was very worried about you. You shouldn't have taken off like that, Jake." "I didn't have a choice," I said defensively. "There are always choices," he said quietly. "What about Sam?" I asked. "He's moved out of the apartment, and he's about ready to head down to Honduras. He was worried about you, too, and happy to hear that you're all right." "And what about me?" I asked quietly. Not at all certain that I wanted the answer. "Well, your uncle's offered to take you in." "I don't want to go there." "I know," he said, and looked at me for a few moments. I told him that it was a very generous offer, but I didn't think I could get along without you. So I guess you're stuck with me. I looked at my father and grinned. After. When we arrived at the home in Poughkeepsie, Peter told us that Tall was taking a nap. While we waited for him to wake up, my father challenged Peter to a game of chess. I walked to the stream in back of the home and sat in Tall's chair. On the drive up, my father told me that he didn't think we'd be going back to Kenya. His work was finished there for now, and it was time to find another field project. In the meantime, we'd find a place in Poughkeepsie near the home so we would be close to Tall. It would be good to be near my grandfather, but I was disappointed too. Would I never see Sepet again? I thought about all of the things I'd learned in Kenya and wondered if I'd ever be able to use them again. I watched the stream and tried to see as Sepet had taught me. A fish rose gently and took an insect off the surface. It was beautiful. I'd have to tell Tall when he woke up.